Hey, thank you all for coming today. We're really excited to kick this off. This is the first Q-Den event we've had in a while, and if this is your first time attending, we really tried to produce events that you can walk away with and make practical, suggested changes for best practices in your contact center. We're glad that you could join us in person and live today from a live stream. Just a quick introduction to CPI. I know a lot of you have dealt with this in the past, but we really work on connecting the dots, digital dots, for customers. So our goal is really to provide a better customer experience digitally that's even available in person today with the demands customers are putting on us. And we do it across 4 pillars. So one is the telephony, enterprise telephony, which we support organizations as long as the Coast Guard from Alaska to Guam. Contact centers, obviously today from a contact center best practices and Omnichannel, CRM, tying it all together through knowledge, incident management, contact management, and the best practices that go along with that, and really enabling employees to collaborate around that, from consulting all the way through implementation and support for the whole life cycle. We've been privileged to do that over a number of technology platforms. So Avaya, we go back all the way, I think, to 1983, support some very large enterprise contact centers and customers. Genesis, special thank you to Genesis. They actually helped sponsor this event today, as well as Oracle, but we've been a Genesis partner in interactive intelligence dating back 17 years today, and have had a lot of opportunities to work with organizations on that platform. LivePerson, we're a premier partner. We help organizations drive millions of dollars of revenue through chat and messaging. And Oracle, who also helps sponsor. For those here in person, you'll see we've got some wonderful, wonderful presence from our Oracle team. So thank you, Oracle. Just a quick reminder here, we have a survey. One of the things we want to do is improve the event, but we also have some door prizes to those who fill this out. So in person, this is what it looks like. By the end, we're going to have a drawing for some special gifts for coming. And for the live stream audience, if you go to the URL that we have on the screen here and have it finished by 1:30 Eastern time, we're also going to be having some drawings for you. You'll be notified. So I just want to encourage you now, while you can, to start filling that out. Questions and answers we're going to hold to the end, so I'd encourage you to write them down. Rick, and we may bring some other CPI experts up here. If you have questions, we're going to have a Q&A time, and for the live stream audience, we actually have chat that we'll be monitoring. Feel free to post any time that you'd like to, and we will save those questions to the end. Now, for the moment everybody's been waiting for, I'm going to get off the stage and invite Rick up here. But Rick's been helping contact centers for over 20 years and working with a lot of organizations, and we're very privileged today that he could travel here and help us with this event. So Rick, I'm going to invite you up and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Hello and good afternoon. My name is Rick McGlinchey, and first I want to say thank you to Chris and our sponsors with CPI and Oracle and Genesis, who many of us refer to as, depending on how long you've been around, it could be Interactive Intelligence, it could be i3, but today it's Genesis. And so I'm very happy to be here today, and I appreciate you all coming to join. I hope you find the talk valuable. And I just want to ask for the folks in the back, can you hear me okay? Raise a hand. Good? We're good? Okay, excellent. Like Chris was saying, I have about 20 years experience in enterprise contact center space and enterprise software. For those of you who are familiar with Don Brown, I worked for his last company, Software Artistry, that was also based here in Indianapolis. That was what brought me here in the first place. I'm originally from northern Indiana in Elkhart, and I've spent most of my career living in Indy and in Indianapolis, especially. Through the time that I spent with Interactive, I joined when there were a little less than 50 of us, and I see a couple fellow veterans here, some still in the fold and some who have moved on to other roles. But it was a very exciting time in the late 90s when I originally joined, and I worked for them for about 10 years. And after that, took a little bit of a sabbatical and started my consulting as an independent around 2010. So the things that I do, I've been in customer-facing roles for my career, and after just a little bit of initial time spent in software development, that was actually my degree. So I have a pretty deep technical background, but I haven't written code in quite some time, and you wouldn't really want me writing or touching your code, I assure you. But what happened over the course of the journey with me with Interactive is I tended to work more with their larger clients. They tended to be like a Fortune Global 1000 organizations like Abbott Labs, which we implemented back in '99. Abbott was the first customer to ever actually install interactive intelligence Genesis solution in more than one physical location. So worked with them, companies like JP Morgan Chase, some of the other names up here. And more recently as an independent, that, like I said, started in 2010, I basically couch it as I help with some of the hard things when it comes to remediation. Maybe you had a technical contact center project or implementation that has gone sideways. Like I said, it may be contact center, not necessarily. Or you're looking to make some improvements in your contact center as well. So I do current state or operational assessments. And since I've had all this time with the vendor, I am not necessarily the guy to tell you how to eke a few more percentage points on meeting your service level. I don't have that deep contact center operation experience, but I have spent a lot of time in different clients' contact centers who have implemented complex solutions such as self-service and other applications, including integrations with other platforms such as CRM, e-commerce, etc. So I want to talk just a little bit about what I'm going to talk about, the agenda for today. The first thing that we have to do when we consider this whole concept of omnichannel is make sure that we have a definition that's relevant for the context of this conversation. And I say that because omnichannel can mean different things to different people. So we'll talk about that. I'll talk a little bit about the history of islands of data, and really it's specific to the contact center. You can obviously run into this with other applications, but I have seen this quite a bit dating back to when I first started, like I said, in the 90s. Then we'll see, unfortunately, it's opportunity in some ways, challenges in others, how history repeats itself, even in today. And then really the question is, well, how do I navigate? And I just want to say up front, there really are no right answers here. It's not a matter of do I put it here or there? It's the question of where does adding this channel lead to the highest value? So, and largely that depends. So one of the other things I want to mention, and this is a little bit funny, at least to me, not sure if the top line comes through, but it says, "Where's my Gartner quote?" If you've ever been to an industry analyst talk or a session similar to this, usually there's going to be some research referenced. And so Mr. Dowland, in the course of getting prepared for the blog post and the presentation material, he said, "Hey, do you have any analyst quotes?" And we all tend to think of Gartner first, or whoever our favorite industry analyst is. So I said, well, I am not completely up to date on all of the different analysts and all of their research that's available today, but I have not really seen anything that directly relates to this topic. So I reached out to a friend over at Genesis who manages their analyst relations, and I said, here's the draft of the article. I'm going to give a talk about this, and have you seen anything, really pointing specifically to this topic? And the response back was, well, we're going to be talking to Gartner here in a couple weeks about this very thing, and we expect that some research will be forthcoming. Now, you may find pockets of that in a conversation that talks about a CRM or maybe an ERP or e-commerce platform. You may see some of it covered in a little bit of detail in a contact center type of report, but not necessarily anything that's particularly focused here. So my response to that was, well, does that qualify me as a thought leader? I don't know. Again, I hope you find it valuable, but the bottom line is what I will cover today is based on my own experience, and just some food for thought if you're taking this journey. So I'd like to take a quick show of hands. Who tends to align themselves more with the IT side of the house? If you don't mind raising a hand, okay, a little bit, yeah. And then who's more in the business and the contact center and the operations? Okay, a little bit greater representation there. And then who falls into another, maybe your vendor, consultant, third party, somewhere in between, couple hands, yep, in the back, great. And one other question, is anyone currently asking themselves, what do I do because I'm looking at adding a new channel in my contact center? Okay, couple, great. We may hit you up a little bit later in the talk. So the answer, hey, what happened to my Omnichannel? Let's go back there. Here we go. If you ask what is Omnichannel, the answer is it depends. And as a consultant, we use that term a lot, sometimes to the frustration of our clients and vendors. But specifically when we ask what is an Omnichannel contact center, or what does Omnichannel mean, it depends on your industry and the context. So one of the examples I give here, if you're in retail, as we have some retail representation here today, the retail store outlet is often referred to as a channel. Okay, same thing for retail banking. Those bank branches, if I'm in insurance, my insurance agencies where I have all of my reps, those are considered channels as well. And if what I have to really take into account is other things like marketing, ask Mr. Dellin here, the marketing guy, he may have radio, he may have print, he may have direct mailing. Omnichannel, as it relates to a marketing strategy, can mean a variety of things. And this omnichannel term has been sort of adopted generally by the communications platforms in recent years. And I think it's helpful in some ways, but can be a little bit confusing or others. As it relates to the contact center, what we're talking about is an omnichannel contact center supports more than voice capability, and that it also may support the concept or the capability of channel promotion or channel switching. A really common example there is if I've started a chat and maybe I want to promote that to video, okay? So to narrow that down even further for the purposes of our conversation, an omnichannel, hey, I thought I hit this.
There you go.
Got it? Okay, good. An omnichannel contact center platform, as I said, supports more than voice as a channel, and possibly this concept of channel switching, channel promotion capability. Okay, and again, I give that chat to video as an example. So your contact center platform may or may not include all of the things that are represented here. We've got video, traditional voice calls, chat, email, fax, social. We had a conversation a little bit earlier about social with one of the groups. This is virtual reality. Anybody that attended the last event that will be deemed interactions last year saw a virtual reality being routed as a contact center object, I guess, and also the whole concept of SMS. So we are calling omnichannel as it relates to the contact center this, right? That's our foundation for the conversation. So let's talk a little bit about history. My history in contact center dates back to the 90s. The 90s, I don't know if you can see the picture in the back, but you got Jordan and the Bulls were busy winning NBA championships. Seinfeld and Friends ruled the airwaves. The Fresh Prince was on TV and hadn't started making hit records yet. And MTV still played music, and also my friends Ren and Stimpy. So roll the clock back 20-ish plus years. And in that same time frame, as it related to the contact center, new channels were starting to emerge. New channels in those days were adding the capability of channels such as email and chat. Those start to come on the scene. And I follow this up by saying those channels weren't necessarily integrated day one, and so the agent experience tended to go from awful to tragic, okay? Anybody out there, does anyone have, well, I won't ask this. Let's just say, generally speaking, it is not uncommon for a contact center agent to have to switch between, 15 plus applications, and the higher ones sometimes end up in the 20s. So we won't ask anybody to raise hands who's in those scenarios, but just know that you're not alone, and that an integrated desktop is actually a very difficult sort of nirvana to achieve, right? As it related to these, I see some nodding heads. As it related to the agent experience, right? I was taking voice calls, and then maybe we added email. We started to have a customer service email address, right? And Outlook wasn't really integrated with the communications platform, so this maybe few handful of agents or reps that I designated to handle those emails would start typing an email response as one of those came in. Oh, by the way, this is probably a group mailbox, and you have, somebody starts at the bottom, somebody starts at the top, and I see nodding heads. They start working their way towards the middle, right? This still happens today. Then a phone call comes in, okay? So here's the agent not being able to manage presence between two systems and being challenged as these other interactions come in. This is also the era, I don't know that Interactive coined the phrase, but it was really the dawn of what we called multimedia queuing. Multimedia queuing being processed through an ACD. ACD is an automatic call distributor, and we still use that term today, even though the ACD processes more than calls. So just a little bit confusing there, try to clarify. It started a long time ago in a galaxy far away. So what were the challenges with new islands being created during this time period? Well, it's not necessarily a challenge, but proprietary phone systems were, they still largely ruled the day. Interactive and some of the other open computer-based telephony platforms were up-and-comers on the scene, and it was a very exciting time for us. Just a quick anecdote, and Kevin can relate to this one. We as Interactive referred to the legacy proprietary systems as Big Iron, because much like the mainframes, they were, Kim remembers this too, were closed systems and proprietary, right? And so Interactive's in-house system, they called microferrous, or little iron, right? So that was a joke, right? Some of the ways that you integrated to the legacy proprietary systems was through all of the technology of a serial cable, right? So if I had something like a workforce management tool that was a third-party developed system, it was connecting in via a computer serial cable between that proprietary system and the computer that did the workforce management. The reason I know this is because as an engineer during my interactive intelligence days, I was writing an integration to both Blue Pumpkin and TCS, which were, Blue Pumpkin was very new on the scene. TCS had been around for a little while. Integration in those days was all the glory of flat files. So interactive intelligence, we created and kicked out a comma-separated file, for those of you familiar with Excel and a CSV. And then the workforce management tool was looking for that file in a specific directory, right? So it was either something as exciting as a serial cable or this comma-separated file integration, in air quotes. So flash forward 20 plus years later, and history repeats. Well, history actually does repeat. And that happens because we have a new rise of point solutions in the market, right? So you have these, I didn't go through the multi-channel evolution, but between multimedia queuing and omnichannel, we had multi-channel. I think multi-channel in some ways is a better fit for contact center until you start getting into that concept of channel switching. Then it really, really takes hold and is meaningful. But today we have point solutions, much like we did for email and chat back in the 90s. Now we have point solutions for things like SMS and video, which is a hot button in a lot of different vertical markets today. And also other capabilities like social and co-browse. If you're going down the co-browse route, you may have to integrate 2 or 3 pieces of technology in order to make that successful. So in the contact center platforms, especially if you're evaluating any of the new cloud native solutions, and besides the offering from Interactive, I have seen several of the other offerings that are available today. They may not necessarily have all of these channels completely capable. And if they do support the channel, you may have to dig a little bit deeper to make sure that it's supported end-to-end through the solution to include areas like workforce management. So in some ways, we're right back to the disruption of the late 90s, now with these cloud native solutions that are, for the most part, they're still in very early stages. That's a little quick sidetrack, but if you are evaluating those, make sure that you do diligence and dig in a little bit deeper than you might in the same way that you hear omnichannel and it could have different meanings. Saying that a channel is supported could have varying levels of meaning. So be cautious and be thorough there. That's why I say some assembly required. And the other opportunity here is that with the variety of platforms available in addition to the contact center, we now have some overlap of capabilities. So it used to be, hey, here's kind of what the contact center does. It routes and supports these media types. Probably in the last 10 years, that was easier to say, well, my chats, my emails, and my phone calls and my faxes, that one was more straightforward. Again, not necessarily any right or wrong answers. It just might have been a little bit easier question to approach if you wanted to add those channels. Now, when we look across the variety and maturity of CRM platforms and e-commerce and ERP, we have this capability potentially available in 2 places. So you have to be very careful and make an informed decision when you're deciding to add a new channel as to which platform that channel's going to sit. So that's how we get into this history repeats. I'm going to go over a couple of case studies, and I won't mention communications platforms or the other solution vendors that were involved, but the 2 that I'm going to go through are from my actual experience within the past few years. And the first one I want to talk about is a Fortune 200 client that I worked with on the East Coast. They had a large management consulting firm acting as a systems integrator for what was their CRM platform of choice. And they were integrating that solution with their contact center platform. Now, these guys, bless their hearts, and I say this as a word of caution, they had undertaken a complete transformation. And I will just say, don't call me if you're taking that approach, because those things are very difficult to pull off. And I'll talk a little bit about how to best handle that in a minute. It's not to say that you can't change all the things, but when we talk about people, process, technology, and strategy, so they were reorganizing. This is a pharma, it was their patient services group. They were ripping out all the technology, new data warehouse, new CRM, new communications platform. I mean, it was just a big, crazy project. And those projects then tend to start off with a lot of excitement and fanfare. And then as you start digging in and you're getting deeper and deeper in discovery, and one of the work streams starts to lag behind a little bit, maybe the contact center finds out the work and the routing was going to be a lot more complex than they expected. In this particular case, the CRM platform that was chosen had a very difficult time. They were trying to do more or less a full migration from the legacy platform to the new one. And at the end of it, they said, literally, we can't do it. I mean, if we could, it would take years and probably manual labor to migrate several years worth of data. So sequencing those things is very important if you're going to make this undertaking. I see some nodding heads. I see some, yeah, been there, done that. One of the challenges that we faced here is that there was some channel overlap, right? So it's kind of, there's this opportunity and there's some chocolate in the peanut butter, and unfortunately, the communications vendor and the systems integrator were not necessarily aligned in this case, and it resulted in a land grab. And thankfully for me, a lot of those decisions were made before I set foot on site, but that's a big struggle. Instead of getting the vendors together and having joint conversations with the client about where the highest value could be added, it was more about, hey, we're a lot bigger, we've done this more, you should put it here. And the client said, yeah, okay, let's do that. It doesn't mean they made wrong choices, I just don't believe that they made an informed decision. That's really what this talk is all about, making an informed decision. So one of the other challenges, and the data back end is really a key here, is the customer wanted to use workforce management for forecasting and scheduling capability. So once you start to bring analytics and especially workforce management into the picture, there's some additional complexity in the question that needs to be addressed and answered. The customer ultimately opted to take on some technical debt to put 2 critical channels with SMS and also chat capability into their new CRM platform. So you might say to yourself, well, Rick, what's wrong with this picture, right? Seems pretty straightforward. You had both vendors there. You were going to be doing a lot of customization in both platforms anyway. What's the problem? Well, there's a few challenges that arise. First of all, remember my example from the 90s when we added some new channels and we had the challenge with presence management? Exact same problem. Now, in the new, let's call them state-of-the-art, in this particular case, CRM platform, there is an integration between the 2 platforms, but that integration, as far as the telephony communications platform is concerned, isn't able to be aware of other activity that it is not handling directly. So if I'm managing phone calls through that integration, it's pretty straightforward. I'm in the CRM, a call pops up, I can click connect, and I know that phone call is connected. But that integration doesn't necessarily know about maybe an email intake that's coming in, or some other channels that are being processed natively in the CRM. So again, it's not wrong. You just really have to dig in to understand what that agent experience is going to look like, because as we all know, the agent experience heavily influences the customer experience, or the patient experience in this case, right? So we're a little bit challenged there, and the workforce management was going to require additional factoring. Now, all of the popular vendor and third-party workforce management solutions tend to allow you to be able to do this. This client was not necessarily an expert in contact center, and we had to go through a pretty lengthy explanation to say, hey, guys, just because you bought these different capabilities doesn't mean that it's some easy button that you just turn on and you can walk away from, drop the mic, right? So they figured that workforce management, because it was going to be provided by the communications platform, was just going to be this simple, straightforward thing. So that was one conversation that we had to have. We also had some challenges not only around workforce management, but reporting, and more importantly, the patient journey data, right? Because now it's landing in 2 different places. That doesn't mean that with a little bit of effort or configuration or possibly some customization that it couldn't be tied together, but it does mean that it doesn't just happen magically out of the box. Even when the vendors say that they have some integration between these 2 systems available, right? So again, make sure you dig in deep enough to understand there. The solution, as I discussed, is just to be prepared for a little bit potentially for some additional integration work. And you might consider putting the channels into the contact center platform if it makes sense. Again, it's not a right or wrong answer. It just means if I'm doing everything else here, unless I have a high strategic value reason to put it in another area, Live Person that CPI supports is a perfect example, right? They get additional uplift and value, and they can show you the benefit if you want to outsource that chat capability. That's not wrong if it adds strategic value and revenue for you, right? Just make sure that you're looking at this from multiple angles. Another area, and I touched on this briefly earlier, just food for thought. If anybody's thinking about doing the big bang, you know, my pharma customer took the whole deck and threw it up in the air. And I just want to highlight, it was an East Coast pharma, not one that's based anywhere close by. I worked with the close by ones too, great people, and we had a lot of fun working with them. Can you sequence the deployments, right? Put a roadmap together. And one of the biggest recommendations against this as well, you know, we just want to do a big rip the Band-Aid and do this change all at once, and because we think that that's going to make it easier on our agents and on our customers. I would suggest that if you sequence them, you would have less change over a longer period of time, so it's going to end up being roughly the same impact, and you stand a much bigger chance at success. Okay? Just food for thought. If you are going to do it all at once, be prepared to be committed and that you're going to have a very big project in front of you. And again, it doesn't really matter which platform that I want to put first. It may, depending on your situation, but there's no right or wrong answer here. Just make sure that you put a little bit of thought into it. For example, if I want to build a self-service IVR application that's going to look up a caller ID in the CRM, that CRM probably has to be online and available for that data to be available to do that transaction, right? So maybe the CRM in that particular example goes first. And also, you know, this idea of sprints and change as a constant, the whole agile approach, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. We have to be more prepared today for ongoing effort, right? That it's never really done, and if you think it's done and you walk away, you may come back in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years and go, oh my goodness, now we need to modernize and we have so much work in front of us. And we could have, God, here's some mm-hms coming out of the group, that maybe we can take smaller bites along the way and stay more current. Another case study, this was a products company, again, another Fortune 500. And this one is kind of interesting because they were implementing new CRM, and it was a CRM platform for them, one of the bigger ones that you've probably heard of, and also a new contact center platform. Their use case was for inside sales reps that needed individualized call lists. And so this is really a trick question. As we get to this whole concept of placing outbound calls, right? So the customer initially opted to purchase outbound dialing capability from the communications platform in addition to a tightly integrated solution with the CRM vendor. And this isn't necessarily wrong or a bad thing until, right, here's back to what's wrong with this picture, until you start looking at the idea of what they wanted to do with outbound dialing. It would have required, in this particular case, unnecessary and extensive customization for the integration to work. And it's all based around this idea of individual call lists, right? You can do that with an outbound dialing tool, and that's not necessarily the wrong thing to do, but you're really going out of your way to use a dialer tool if it really needs to route to, you know, Rick's customers and the customers that Chris needs to call, et cetera, right? That's not really able to take advantage of the economies of scale in a pool of agents that you get with a dialer. So the other challenge is that they, from kind of the island perspective, is that some of the customer journey data would have ended up in the communications platform. So you can get that back to tie into the CRM with a little bit of configuration or integrations work, but you've put it out here unnecessarily when you didn't really need dialer in the first place. So the solution, after some discussion, hey, we understand you made this license investment and you're definitely going to be using that money somewhere else at some point. All you really need is click-to-dial capability integration between your contact center and your CRM, and they put all of the secret sauce in this customization that they built within the CRM tool, the thing that helped them decide who they needed to call on a given day. So here's the question. If I potentially run into the risk of creating new islands, well, how do I navigate? And what is my favorite response? Anybody? It depends. Exactly. Okay, good. They were paying attention. Good. It depends. What does it depend on? Depends on seeing the slide. So navigating the potential of new islands, well, first of all, and I've hit this a couple times, what are the impacts to routing, reporting, workforce management? You absolutely have to begin with the end in mind. I joke, you know, Covey wrote that book about 7 people with effective habits, right? We know that's not really the title, but one of those habits is begin with the end in mind. And in these sorts of systems implementations, that's the KPIs, right? I have to think about what measurements and what do I need from a scheduling capability, especially when workforce management is concerned. Do you have anybody in workforce management capability here today? Make sure you include those people in your conversation, whether you use a spreadsheet or whether you use a tool that's provided with your communications platform or potentially a third-party tool. These people need to be in the know. Is that new channel that you're going to consider adding, is it isolated? Is it a small group that's not necessarily tied to the dominant function in the contact center and the other channels that are supported? Well, it might make sense. We were talking a little bit earlier before the session started that we may, depending on whether it's temporary or long-term, we may start off one route with a little bit of integration, and then after we get some data, try to do a deeper dive and potentially switch where that channel is housed within the options of platforms. So you can't necessarily see it there, but after that one it says think agile. I'll give a quick anecdote about agile. And let's imagine I don't have maps and I don't have a GPS, but I am in upstate New York and I believe that I want to go to Seattle. Okay, so East Coast to West Coast. So I hop in my car and I start driving. I make my first stop for gas, and I'm talking to somebody there, and they say, hey, well, where are you headed? I said, well, I want to go to Seattle. It's like, oh, well, what do you want to go to Seattle for? It's like, well, you know, I want to see, I hear it's really nice there this time of year. I'm looking for sunshine, and the person's like, well, wait a minute, you know, Seattle's kind of overcast, right? That may, if you're going to hit West Coast, maybe you want to head a little bit further south, like towards California. So I continue my journey, and now maybe I'm headed more towards, let's say, San Diego, and I make another stop, and somebody says, you know, where are you headed? And I'm like, well, you know, I'm going to San Diego. Oh, what are you looking to see there? Well, you know, I hear they have sunshine, they have beaches, I want to see the water. And the person says, you want beaches and water and sunshine, right? Yeah. Well, you're at the Ohio border and it's July. Why don't you just turn back and go to the Jersey Shore? Okay? So in agile terminology, those were each sprints, and we got validated learning along the way, and then we made a pivot. And we ended up in a completely different place, and we got exactly what we needed. So taking off these big, huge waterfall model approaches, if you look at Gartner bimodal IT, they're going to tell you to be very cautious about taking the larger sort of traditional waterfall approach, which you would do with back-end systems that don't change a lot, right? The stuff like the secret sauce I mentioned in the CRM, this custom scheduling object that the client built, Anytime it's secret sauce, strategic value add that differentiates you from your competitors, that's where you make the investment in customization, right? So be sure to include your vendors and potentially others in the conversation, but don't get sold. I don't mean that to be as sharp as it sounds, but if I only talk to one of the vendors of my options, they may not necessarily be fully aware of those capabilities in the other platforms. So it's up to you to make anybody? Informed decision. Outstanding, good. So make sure to document that decision, and you could potentially consider bringing in somebody like myself who doesn't have a dog in the race necessarily, right? Bottom line is, again, we said it there, make an informed decision. When is it okay to potentially introduce a new island, if you will? That may not be the phrase preferred by most, but at least for the context of this conversation, if you're looking at a point solution, and we've talked a little bit about those, versus all-in-ones, versus your other platforms, which may be a CRM, an ERP, e-commerce, I mean, that list of acronyms goes on and on. Just make sure that you're making the choice that adds your highest value, right? That's really the key to that informed decision. There's no right or wrong answer there as long as you made it consciously, right? And that you can get your metrics and workforce management. You may have some additional integration or configuration to take on. Again, expect some custom reporting if you go this route. And as one of my friends that's in the industry says, when I was a contact center manager, custom reporting is a way of life. No vendor's reports on any solution is ever going to meet all of your needs. And we have some folks that are at the CIO level role in the office, in the audience. I see a nodding head out here. Usually you're going to have some need for some custom reports. So get the data in a data warehouse and correlate it there. Is that right? Yes. That is the bottom line about making that informed decision. I want to take a couple minutes here at the end to see if we got any questions or if anybody has a scenario where they're looking to add a channel and see if maybe we can talk through that a little bit. Questions? No questions. Wow. Oh, Mr. Dellin.
Yeah, I got one. So you mentioned the strategy being driven partially by the KPIs.
Mm-hmm.
What KPIs do you see being the most valuable from a strategic side beyond it depends?
Right. So it's a host of things. CSAT's going to be the biggest one, right? Customer satisfaction. We say voice of customer, VOE, voice of employee. Let's make sure we're thinking about those things. Specific to areas like workforce management that we talked about, that's always built around SLAs. Are we going to be able to measure and monitor and manage to our SLAs, right? So whether I'm using a spreadsheet to calculate or a third-party tool, need to make sure that I get those types of things. So, does that help? Yeah. Other questions? Oh, you guys are too easy. Okay, great. I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Dellin.
Thanks so much, Rick. Really appreciate it. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you.
So a couple of things. We talked through some scenarios. A minute ago, we mentioned the surveys. If you haven't turned those in, please fill them out and do so. If you're online, I believe we have the link. David, can you put the link up for the live stream, folks? And we'll be having a couple of drawings here in just a minute. Now, we're trying to get a little more diligent about producing our Qden events in a regular fashion. We're aiming for quarterly. And our next presenter is going to be speaking on another piece of the Omnichannel picture, which is web self-service. So Derek Chin, I'm going to invite you up here just to give us a little taste of what you're going to be talking about. All right.
Hello, everybody. How are you? Good, good. So we wanted just to give a little bit of a preview for our next Qden event. So for a lot of you, one of the questions that certainly comes up at one time or another pertains to knowledge management. So what we wanted to do is to actually present some topics and specifically about really how to hold knowledge management in your organization. So, I think as you guys think to how the evolution of your contact center lives, and especially as it ties into these islands of data conversation, certainly one of the islands that you have to consider is self-service. And so along with that, knowledge management really plays a key role. And so what we hope to provide to you guys is a little bit of insight into potentially how to think about knowledge management differently, and also most importantly, I think how it really does fit in as a true channel for your organizations.
Thank you, Derek. So invitations will be going out on that probably in the next month or two. And I think we have a link, David, on one of my slides here, actual link, actually it's at the beginning of the presentation, never mind. If you go to cpi.solutions/QI, you can actually register to receive invitations. If you haven't received an invitation to be invited to this event, please feel free to go. If you're attending today, we'll make sure you're automatically on that list. Otherwise, I think that wraps up the event today. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending.